Welcome to City Circus, community created here on Shaw TV. I'm your host, Marty Gold. This is citizen journalism in action. We get action for people. We ask questions that the mainstream media doesn't think of sometimes, or maybe they just don't want to ask. And this is the only long-form interview format in all of Winnipeg television. And we've had a number of city councillors, school trustees, and even an MLA drop by the studio here at Shaw TV, where we could give them an opportunity to get across to you, the viewer, and explore some serious issues of the day. I'm going to open with provincial politics this week, but it relates to civics, and interestingly enough, it also relates to this program. I received an email last week indicating that a former guest of this program has been appointed as the new chair of the Manitoba Taxicab Board, whose sole responsibility is to regulate your taxis in the City of Winnipeg. And accordingly, I don't know if this is the kind of thing you can congratulate somebody for when they walk into a minefield, but David Saunders has been tapped on the shoulder and asked to help regulate Winnipeg's taxicabs. And we even asked him a couple of questions about taxicab regulation when he appeared in the course of his campaign for mayor. And at that time, he agreed that it appeared to him that Winnipeg needed more cabs because he couldn't get one coming out of City Hall at like 4 o'clock. And so we're going to be inviting Mr. Saunders in his role as cab board chairman to appear on this program and have a discussion about the conditions of the industry, the service issues that you face as customers, and some of the issues that employed drivers face. The labor standards of that industry have been washed away in the years since myself and Phil Walding and Randy DeLorme worked to try to establish some basic rights for drivers. We're going to try to get Mr. Saunders on the record about all those issues, including the fare structure, and see if we can't move taxicab regulation out of 69 years ago and into a modern day context. Over to the illustration board. See recent episodes online, citycircus.ca, on Twitter at TGCTS, and my email is always martygoldlive@gmail.com. One of the only places on television, the only place in Winnipeg, Manitoba television, where you see any lengthy discussion or explanation about Manitoba Hydro and your rates going up and your sense that the province's credit rating is going to go down. The Black Rod contributing an amazing piece of analysis. It's lengthy. This is important. I want you to follow along. You're going to understand not only why your hydro rates are going up, but why you're being taken to the cleaners. This is not anything other than new dem economics. There's no real solid business foundation behind what's going on. This year, Public Utilities Board being asked to raise hydro rates by 3.95%. Blackrod pointing out that in September of 2012, Hydro's CEO at the time said customers could expect increases of about 3.5%. So the minimum rate hike climbed by almost 0.5% a year after the plan to build the biggest generating station, Conowapa, was scrapped. This means Hydro's finances deteriorating faster than ever, says the Black Rod. Hydro is on the fast track to insolvency and hopes to hide it as long as possible. Canadian press story indicated that the PUB warned last year low prices could force Manitoba consumers to subsidize exports, see domestic rates jump by 140%. That was actually from 2012, okay? It's a continuation of the 2012 story. Even without Conowapa, Hydro is going to be tripling prices within 20 years. Why does Hydro suddenly need so much more money? They used to say it's because of 3 new dams they intended to build that would earn huge profits from sales in the United States, but the smallest, Musqueam, is built. The largest, Conowapa, is on ice. The last thing they want to do is draw attention to the one remaining, which is why they claim they need the extra cash to rebuild Hydro's existing infrastructure, not the additions to it, by Paul. Musqueam, an unmitigated disaster, cost almost twice as much to build as projected, and by the time it went into service, export electricity prices had collapsed thanks to a boom in shale gas production. Manitoba Hydro now sells electricity in Minnesota, watch this, at 1/3 of what it costs to produce that electricity. We're paying higher and higher rates at home to subsidize users of our power in the United States. Now, next up, Kiosk, 3.5 times as big as Musqueam. Imagine a boondoggle 10 times worse than the new Blue Bombers football stadium, and you know where this is going. They say the devil is in the details, and we found the paved road to hell in Kiosk. The line expected to cost anywhere from $558 to $710 million, depending on the route, American dollars, excluding construction inflation and financing costs. That estimate is already more than $150 million higher on the low end than Minnesota Power projected 2 years ago. That should be a warning, says the Black Rod, of how high construction inflation will be. When it's all said and done, Manitoba Hydro is going to pay 72% of the cost of the transmission line in Minnesota. They want to build it bigger than necessary so it can sell more electricity to other customers in the future. So Hydro's bill works out to between 401 and 511 million US. Add between 80 million and 100 million for the exchange rate, I guess, plus financing costs, plus inflation. Add 350 million Hydro will pay for the transmission line from Kiosk to the border. A bottom line of nearly $1 billion just to send the power from us to them. Hydro will end up owning 49% of the line, which it doesn't want to own, according to these regulatory filings in the United States. Hydro's either going to sell their share of the line or assign it to Minnesota Power. Minnesota Power will continue to be responsible for only 33.3% of the operations and maintenance costs. So with all this extra capacity, the Americans decided to double down on their amazing opportunity. The original deal contained a unique provision that let Minnesota store off-peak excess power from wind farms with Manitoba. Hydro would in effect serve as a giant battery for Minnesota. Wind power often produced at times when there's no demand for electricity. Under the deal, that power would be credited to Manitoba for delivery to its customers, while Manitoba would store water behind its dams instead of using the water to create power. When Minnesota needs power, it could tap into the stored energy and reclaim it from Manitoba. And here's a lengthy quote from David Comrie, Hydro's manager of power sales and operations. The Hydro system's like a 4,500 megawatt battery. There's the potential to purchase up to 1,500 megawatts at night and return 3,000 megawatts during the day. It sounded so good, Minnesota signed a side deal. Now Minnesota can use all the power created by wind farms that it buys from North Dakota. But here's the fun part. Hydro will buy Minnesota Power's wind power, which they call pumped energy. If the wind power is part of this 133 megawatt power purchase, Minnesota will charge Manitoba a must-take fee to cover the transmission costs, the delivery costs. And then when Minnesota wants, it can reclaim its power to either use or resell on the open market. The price Manitoba pays for Minnesota's wind energy is a trade secret. The price Hydro gets for selling the power back to Minnesota Power is a trade secret. What isn't a trade secret, says the Black Rod, is logic. Power created when nobody wants it is worth nothing. How do you buy and sell something worth nothing unless you're paying something for nothing? Now, to clarify this gobbledygook, we're paying the lion's share of a power line. Minnesota will use that overcapacity to send wind power to Manitoba and charge us a transmission delivery cost for the privilege of using a line we're paying for to buy power they can't sell anywhere else. Manitoba will then buy power it doesn't need at a price that's a secret when that power is worthless on the open market, and then will sell the power back also at a secret price to Minnesota whenever they want, so they don't have to buy more power from Manitoba, or, as the Black Rod has figured out, so they can sell that power in competition with power from Manitoba Hydro. Not sweet enough? The agreements include an annual wind storage credit, all of which will go to Minnesota Power regardless of whether the wind energy is coming or going. This, again, from regulatory filings in the United States. The agreement is equivalent to approximately the anticipated annual off-peak production of our Bison wind facilities. Minnesota Power projects the economic benefits for customers to be approximately 1.7 million annually and could rise to 4 million annually. In other words, they get no green credits for producing power in the night when it's not needed, but if they sell it to Manitoba, they do. So we're buying power we don't need. They're scarfing up the Enviro credits for a deal that covers 15 years at $1.7 million a year. Manitoba Hydro gave up $25 million. Peanuts! The final word going to Dave McMillan, Executive Vice President of Minnesota Power, speaking to the Pioneer Press in 2012, when the Minnesota Power Agreement was first announced, revealing vital information that's never been reported before in Manitoba. This from twincities.com. The agreement has no cost estimate yet because the hydroelectric purchase is tied to the price of natural gas in 2020. Poof. There goes all your investment in hydro. There goes your rates going up. The Enviro credits going to the U.S. They can sell the power that we pay to store for them at all these unknown prices. Then they can sell it in competition to Manitoba Hydro. I'm getting lots of tips about hydro that I'm having trouble even sorting out because there's a lot of money being tossed around, and you know because it's not in your wallet anymore. And you see that the primary foundation of this, the need to sell power to the U.S., well, of course, that's balderdash. And as I explained on the program in the last few weeks, this is actually part of a greater social engineering project to transfer wealth from your pocket to First Nations bands across northern Manitoba that are in the territories where the dams are going to be, without, in some cases, those bands investing a dime in order to make profits now, as we see with Nelson House, in advance. None of this, these inside dealings, this is reported by the Black Rod blog, not by mainstream media reporters. You'd think that reporters at some point in corporate media would have taken the time to look at those Minnesota filings, U.S. regulatory filings, and see just how bad of a deal this is. But instead we have the spectacles like the following. Dan Lett, Winnipeg Free Press, got into a spat on Twitter last week after writing a column alleging that Conservative leader Brian Pallister hands out the so-called Wooden Bison Award as a derogatory kind of thing for poor performance in the legislature. Shannon Martin, the MLA from Morris, tweeting, I learned today, this would be, I guess it was last Monday, you can print any BS story you want and still claim journalistic integrity. Dan Lett replying, you can ask voters to let you run the province and repeatedly lie about your own affairs. My sources were bang on. So here's Dan Lett accusing the Conservative Party, a Conservative caucus, and Mr. Shannon Martin of lying. Shannon Martin then saying, I've sat in caucus for the last 18 months. Not once has the scenario you described happened. Not once. Well, multiple sources, Dan Lett says, those would be anonymous sources, disagree with you. I wouldn't have printed it if it wasn't true. There is BS here, but not coming from me. Now, that's pretty strong, a pretty strong approach coming from a member of the Fifth Estate. Dan Lett also saying, when you fib about stuff like that, you cross a bridge you can never go back over. Way to go. That sounds like a taunting remark. Just like the leader of your party saying he was on a family vacation during the floods when he was in Costa Rica. So now all of a sudden, where Pallister was or wasn't, well, I don't know. If you're in Costa Rica, then I would think that's a family vacation because I'm pretty sure that Esther went with him, but I digress. David Lobson chiming in, unreliable sources, no one cares what the Free Press says. Free Press is protecting their friends in politics. Shannon Martin reiterating to Dan Lett, you're completely wrong. You're wrong on the bison, utterly and completely. Dawn Lepp chiming in, lastly, using the wives of NDP MLAs is not a reliable source. She was tweeting this on Friday. That would be a wife of a former cabinet minister. She denies having started it, but somehow a former cabinet minister's wife knew about this Wooden Bison allegation on the Friday. Dan Lett prints it on the Monday. Shannon Martin says that's absolutely not true. And Dan Lett, instead of maybe digging a little deeper for the truth, decides to say, well, my sources are good, and just because you were actually there, you must not be telling the truth. I leave it to you with this video clip to ascertain how truthful and sharp-minded Shannon Martin is. Question about Knott's Berry Farm, which is, as he explains, very close to one of the dikes that has been built for water control on the Assiniboine. And he catches the new conservation minister, Tom Navashnikov, not only quite unawares, but watch how Navashnikov, in the end, goes back to the old reliable Gary Philman as his response. Watch this clip.
The honourable member for Morris.
Speaker, a couple of weeks ago I attended Knott's Berry Farm in my constituency. Despite the fact it is located half a kilometre from the Assiniboine River, standing water is drowning out his 25-year-old investment, as these pictures will show. Can the minister explain why Knott's Berries is drowned out by seepage along a provincially owned dike?
The Honourable Minister of Conservation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. I would welcome the opportunity to sit down with the member and discuss this issue further. It's casework related. I don't have the specific information before me, so if the member opposite is willing and able, I can meet with him in the loge or in my office after this and take the details down and endeavour to get the answer for him. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Morris.
Mr. Speaker, let's broaden the terms for the minister. The NDP have permanently altered the water table in the area. They have turned formerly productive agricultural land into swampland. Now, instead of corn and Saskatoons, you're getting cattails, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister commit to tabling an action plan to deal with the water seepage that is a result of government action? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister of Conservation.
Mr. Speaker, and if the member opposite wants to talk about water strategy, I would remind him of the situation back in 1999 when we were first elected. The first act, one of the first 3 acts we put through this legislature was reconstituting the Water Rights Act, because they had mismanaged the system so badly over their time in office that their jurisdiction was actually thrown out by a court of law in this province. It was called the Hildebrand case. So we have no lessons to learn from members opposite in regard to water management in this province. Thank you.
As I said, I can understand how Navashnikov would go, well, I don't know anything. Maybe the honourable member can meet with me. But look, if you watch that clip, Shannon Martin giving a science lesson about how the water table has been changed by the dike, which seemingly is something that they're right over the heads of the NDP. And Navashnikov's only answer is, 15 years ago, Gary Filmon did or didn't do something? Does that really matter? Of course not. But that's what happens when you have a government that's run out of gas. Going to turn our attention to the City Hall and Civics file right after this break. Welcome back to City Circus. Just a reminder, you can go on our website, citycircus.ca, and if you look around and look for the, actually, if you Google City Circus Manitoba Hydro, a bunch of stories that we've done here on this program will come up about the Manitoba Hydro. Put in, Google City Circus and all sorts of topics, WRHA. That'll come up, right? City Hall, Sam Cates, if you want to delve back into the good old days. Fire halls. No fire halls today, but debacles nonetheless. More about the Marion Street Overpass, Save Happy Land Park meeting. On Facebook last week, May 30th, I indicated to the group I learned about a newsletter sent to the residents by the Triple M Consulting Group inviting people to the Archwood Open House. I'd like to review the contents. Tracy Fitzsimmons didn't get one. Now here's a copy of the email from someone named Erica Blackie saying the newsletter went out to everyone in the neighborhood. Please forward it and those who may be interested in attending. Right? Laura Clausen. She talked to a group of people at the meeting. Only one guy at that open house at the time I was there had a newsletter out of a room of roughly 50 people. So I reiterate the remark. Really, the newsletter, when I went out to everyone in the neighborhood, Laura said, well, I didn't receive anything from Triple M Group. The only notification I got on the open house was from Hair Passion, which was the case for most people I talked with. They had Sandra's flyers, right, that would have been stocked up there. This person, S, no newsletter received at our home on Youville. Laura, again, the individual at the group we talked with, the school claimed any notification was in the Free Press or the Sun when the majority doesn't receive the newspaper. This reliance of city consultants on transportation projects, their reliance on newspapers was covered in the audit. It was a central concern raised in 2010, the audit conducted in 2011 by Brian Whiteside, submitted to council and passed unanimously, accepted in January of 2012, that they weren't going to accept that standard of running ads in the weekend newspapers when there's been this generational shift. And although there's some value in it, it is not the be-all and the end-all of telling people, hey, there's a meeting and you might have your street bulldozed. Christine Tricky on Facebook published an email that she sent after the meeting to Councillor Allard, as well as to a representative of Triple M, and one to Mayor Bowman. My husband and I were at the meeting May 27th at the Archwood Community Centre. This is the first time we've seen the entire plan, and the only reason we've known about any of the meetings is the flyers sent by other residents. We've lived in this area for 20 years. To my understanding, Prosper, St. Catherine, Trombley, and Denisett would have a sound barrier cement walls cutting off access to Archibald, with the first access point being Cuson. If this is correct, what is the plan for access to these streets for emergency services and snow clearing? Uh-oh. As the only access to Cuson for any of these streets would be through 2 gravel back lanes full of potholes, one of which turns into the back lane between Denisett and Cuson. No mention in the plans to address this were made clear to any residents. Will the potential safety concerns with the park partially being blocked from traffic view at night be addressed, i.e. potentially providing additional lighting? Is the Fort Garry Curling Club at risk of being removed? This brings, which by the way it is, Folklorama comes in there. It's the home of the Winnipeg Roller Derby during the summer months, providing the league with an affordable venue for public games. Seeing an upgrade of this side would direct additional traffic throughout this area of the city. Has any forethought been put into addressing, and then she lists a number of potential problems up and down Archibald, Cottonwood, and Elizabeth Road. 2 pages, which for purposes of the amount of time I have, I can't get into. On to her last page. Back up on Archibald could be solved on a much smaller scale. If any smaller scale plan has been suggested or reviewed, this would prevent the removal of affordable housing that is not always easy to find and is usually the most sought after by families starting out, by seniors looking to scale back. We have neighbors, this is in this area around Seine River by Happyland Park on Marion, who've been in this area for 30 years that are already talking about selling their homes if this plan is approved, as it will destroy one of the most unique areas in the city and make it far less family friendly. Yes, but Provincial get bike lanes. Currently, it is not a neighborhood that is in decline, an area people take an interest in improving. Homes in this area rarely stay on the market for more than a couple of weeks to a month, a trend I'm sure will not continue if this plan is passed in its current state. Open effort to find a more reasonable solution is made, and that's one of many emails that Matt Allard and the consultants have gotten as the Seine River neighborhood fights back. But here's another example. This is costed out. A Class 5 estimate could be half of what it is, $250 million, or up to $500 million. $500 million, that's $500 million, without any expropriation costs. And when people at the meeting heard that, their eyes lit up, because they know in this city, when they hear a number, they know it's going through the roof. Case in point, Plessy's Road project, which looks like an episode of Hogan's Heroes. Costs continue to climb, with another $1.6 million racked up in the last 3 months. They won't make a key July 31st deadline open lanes to traffic, so they've had to ask Ottawa to postpone things. Councillor Russ Wyatt has called for the immediate suspension of the Director of Public Works. He reiterated that again last week, and an investigation to determine who is responsible for the delays and cost increases. Is this another police headquarters project all over again, where no one was responsible and no one was in charge, says Wyatt? And meanwhile, you could just hear, I know nothing, I see nothing in the background from Public Works. Oh, these things happen. It's like peeling the layers off an onion, except you, the taxpayers, are the one that are supposed to cry. Because the bureaucrats face no penalties, they get the same paycheck, and they go home to wherever it is they live. Climbed to $85.4 million, this price tag, originally budgeted at 77, so 10%, 7%, so it's more than 10% already. Pushed back a year because of delays caused by scheduling work around the needs of CN Rail and the oil companies that maintain underground pipelines that run parallel to Plessy's Road. And Councillor Wyatt spoke about that briefly on this program when he interviewed him earlier in the year and in the past, about how city officials seemingly laid out this project and had no idea there was not, they might have known about one, but for sure they didn't know there was two pipeline companies that had to be negotiated with. Now, not every boondoggle is solely financed by the public purse at three levels of government. There's some that are only slightly subsidized by the public purse by three levels of government. And in this case, as promised, the Upper Fort Garry adventure continues. I said 3 levels. I'm not sure the feds have got a piece of that action, though God knows they'll get asked at some point. Derek at aroundthistown.ca a couple of weeks ago with a very good review. In 2007, Crystal developers signed a deal to build a high-rise apartment building between Fort and Main Street north of Assiniboine. When it was discovered the building would partially overlap the footprint of the historic Upper Fort Garry, there's a public outcry that prompted Crystal to redesign the whole project. The result was the best of both worlds. It would add much-needed density and rental units to the downtown core, and a park and farmers market that honored the historical significance would be on the remaining footprint. And here's a map. Look, that's what it was supposed to look like. Then along came the Friends of Upper Fort Garry, the many of whom are members of the nearby Manitoba Club. In their place, they planned an elaborate interpretive center. Gordon Sinclair was one of certain people in the media who aided and abetted in a Save the Fort misinformation campaign, which, as Derek explained 2 paragraphs earlier, had already been saved by the developer. Gary Dewar's premier got on board. School children turned in their piggy banks. That was disgusting. And Mayor Sam Cates, who told me personally that this was a ridiculous campaign, had his arm sufficiently twisted to change his mind because of the pressure, both public and behind closed doors. This project represents the worst of everything in Winnipeg. A developer screwed around by the city, last-minute knee-jerk decision-making, backroom politics, and a great deal of wasted money that will cost taxpayers millions upon millions of dollars, and oh yeah, surface parking lots. Project, initially supposed to cost $12.5 million, has ballooned to $28 million, $15 million yet to be raised. $13 million of that, the 15, is to build an interpretive center to occupy the parking lot that was originally going to be a high-density apartment building. Now, the amount of money in May of 2015 the Friends need to raise to develop the parking lot is equivalent to the original initial cost of the entire project. This is one reason why it was a mistake to approve the Friends' request for a temporary parking lot. It's not temporary. There's no prospect of this interpretive center getting built without a massive injection of government money. The city's suffering from donor fatigue, from relentless fundraising for the Canadian Museum for Human Rights and many other worthwhile causes. Even Gordon Sinclair has turned on the Friends and mentioned the museum sucking up available dollars in this marketplace. The Friends will have their hands full just trying to fund the complex-laden heritage wall. Other reasons that Derek goes into why this is not needed. The interpretive center not needed because the park itself is designed as an interpretive center. The heritage wall will be capable of depicting and describing anything the Friends wish to depict and describe about the bygone era of Upper Fort Garry. What the Friends have planned for the parking lot will add little value. The city has a moratorium on new surface parking lots, but an exception has now been made. Hello, Jenny Gerbasi. And she's not alone in that, by the way, to raise money for an over-budget park sponsored by a select group of rich Winnipeggers. This watering down of the city's ban on surface parking lots makes the moratorium essentially meaningless. Any potential development of this empty space is going to be delayed by another 2 years. Something will need to happen if it doesn't get built with this property. If it is not to remain a surface parking lot forever, ta-da! That means some kind of development, potentially like the apartment building that was killed 7 years ago. The decision to grant a 2-year parking lot exemption, writes Derek, means no meaningful decision will be made about the future of the site for another 2 years, which means more foregone property taxes. All, in my mind, he says, excellent reasons for rejecting the request by the Friends of Upper Fort Garry and why the councillors who voted in favor of the request made the wrong decision. But the biggest reason is simply this. It supports a project that represents everything that is wrong with development in Winnipeg, backroom politics, wasted money, over-budget projects, 11th hour decision-making based on influence and not merit. And if the Friends of Upper Fort Garry need to raise money to complete their project, writes Derek, they already have a very reliable source, their bank accounts. So you see that in this case, the alternative media, 2 blogs, Black Rod blog dissecting Hydro's deal with Minnesota, and here Derek on aroundthistown.ca dissecting the entire debacle that has unfolded for years with regards to the Upper Fort Garry project. We started on radio with the Great Canadian Talk Show, covering and criticizing these kinds of projects, have continued it here on TV. And why is that? To watch out for you, to be your watchdog, to protect you at all costs, to make sure that you're informed. So when politicians come at your door and they knock and they say, hey, vote for me, you go, what about this? And what about that? And what about the other thing? And you nail them with facts and you make them answer the questions. And if you don't like the answers, you go on to the next person seeking your vote. That's the way democracy works. Remember, as always, you have the power.